Hi, Professor. My name is Mark Ditkoff, and I am doing my video final for your Education 512 course. The first question that I'm going to answer is, what is differentiation of instruction, and what do many teachers believe about differentiation that is most likely wrong and harmful for their students? The way you taught me differentiation of instruction is when a teacher changes the way they teach in order to match the students in that class. By this, I mean that this might include very detailed-oriented activity for high-achieving students and a very concept-driven activity for the struggling students, where the high-achieving students might have a little bit more specific work to do, while the struggling students just have to do something that's really just concept-driven to make sure that they understand the main points of the lesson. Some teachers believe that differentiation means that it's an easy task for the struggling students and a difficult task for the high-achieving students, but that's definitely not true. If you just make the task easier for the students, then they will never actually be able to grow in the way that they need in order to succeed. The responsibilities that come with this knowledge are properly differentiating my lesson plans in my classroom. I can no longer say that I don't know how to properly differentiate, and I cannot ignore the need to do so in my class. I can't just let all of the students be considered benchmark students and therefore just, let the struggling students flounder and the high-achieving students get bored while the benchmark ones are really the only ones I'm targeting. That's no longer okay. In my instruction in particular, what do I need to improve? The ability to differentiate my instruction is something that I have struggled with throughout my first year of teaching, especially to non-native English speakers, so my ESL students. In order to improve this aspect of my instruction, I plan on working with Loretta Arguello at East High School. She's actually my assistant soccer coach, and she's a good friend of mine now. She's the ESL teacher at East. So I plan on working with her to help design lesson plans and figure out what exactly I can do in order to best suit my students. I know I've already talked to her, and she said that if I can make a set of notes based on that class, the ESL students can focus on paying attention and trying to grasp the concept as opposed to just translating the words down onto pages. And therefore I can give them the notes at the end of every lesson, and they can take them to her so that she can work with them. And this way she knows exactly what is supposed to be taught as opposed to the student trying to explain what they think that they went through that day. In my building, there are many IDEA principles that are out of compliance. The one I think is most out of compliance is the least restricted environment policy. At East, I've seen a lot of students taken out of the classroom very frequently, and I believe that with the least restrictive environment policy, they should be in their general education class as often as possible and only taken out in certain circumstances and for certain lessons, where I feel like a lot of students come out every single time they have a math course. They just get taken out and immediately go no matter what the lesson is that day. In order to maybe help East get into compliance with that principle, I think that I could work with the administration and then also the special education teachers to make sure that they understand what is supposed to be happening, and therefore maybe they just didn't realize what that principle meant. I'm sure they do, but I mean, I don't know why else we'd be doing it this way if it were, in accordance with the principle to not take these students out of the classroom. Question 4 is, what student disability is most likely going to impact my instruction next year? How will I best accommodate this student? Next year, I have a good chance of actually having a special ed student who has a physical condition where he is bound to a wheelchair and is unable to really use much of his arms or legs or anything at all. He can write, but what I've talked to some of the special ed teachers about is that he writes very, very slowly because he has to focus very hard on doing so. He has an iPad, which does make it a little bit quicker for him, but still it's not as easy to work on an iPad as a typical student working in his notebook. So if I have him in class, I'm going to accommodate him by giving him extra time on work because he's mentally able to do the work. It's just his physical ability to put it on paper takes longer than the typical student, than a benchmark student. I also am going to make sure to work with his caseworker so that he's receiving the necessary modifications on his work in order for him to be as successful as possible. Because I don't know exactly what his modifications are at this moment, but I foresee that I'm going to have to, again, give him more time, maybe do the more concept-driven lessons as opposed to focusing on these little details that really aren't going to affect his education as much. Especially because it just takes him a lot longer to write, that maybe even though he might be able to handle the more detailed oriented stuff, that it just might take him too long to put it down on paper, and therefore it would behoove him to just work on the concept-driven ideas. And then also, just like the ESL students, I could give him a copy of notes at the end of every class. And this way, during class, he could focus on paying attention and trying to grasp the lesson, as opposed to racing and trying to write the notes down as I'm saying them. If I just gave him a copy, he could actually just follow along throughout class and make little notes based on the copies that I give him. He could also take those to a special ed teacher again, and then they'd know exactly what he did during class, and from there they'd be able to work with him. The last question that you asked was it wasn't a question, I guess, but list 8 principles for making differentiation a habit. Create a list that will include critical elements for creating student success and leadership. I created 8 statements, kind of 8 rules to live by in the classroom that I think would help most teachers understand why differentiation is important and how to make sure you're implementing them. The first one I said was, not all students are created equally. Stop treating them as such. A lot of teachers in their classroom think of everybody as at the benchmark level. If you're above that, great, you're just above it. And if you're below it, hopefully you can catch up. They really don't think of it as multiple groups of students coming from multiple places and how the instruction needs to be oriented toward helping each of them in the same way. Number 2 is, in the end, what does the student need to know? Focus on that. With these struggling students, does it really matter if they can find the volume of an irregular rhombus pyramid? Probably not. They probably won't use that again after that chapter in geometry. However, is it important for them to be able to understand what volume is and how to find the volume of certain basic objects that then in the future they could hopefully apply to more complex shapes? Absolutely. So that's where it says, what does the student need to know? Well, they need to know the key concepts that will help them succeed in the future and won't leave them behind. That means also they don't need to focus on the little tricky questions that are really there to challenge the high-achieving students. Number 3, high-achieving students need help too. Don't forget about them. There are many times where I've seen teachers, and I myself am guilty of it too, thinking, oh, that student is always really good at what he does, he doesn't need any of my help. When in reality, he needs a lot of help, he's just not used to having to ask for it. Some of the struggling students are what are called helpless hand raisers. They constantly raise their hand, they constantly ask for questions, and these high-achieving students aren't used to it, so they're not ready to ask questions when they actually have one. So the rule is just don't forget that the high-achieving students need to be checked for their understanding just as much as the struggling students and the benchmark students. Number 4 I put down as the benchmark students should be the middle 33% of the class. Each class is different, and in order to really hone in on that class's ability, make your benchmark students the middle 33%. That way your bottom 33 is your struggling, your upper 33 is your high achieving. The high achieving students in one class might not be the high achieving in another, but if you treat them as the high achieving students no matter what, they will be the leaders of that class, and they'll be able to maybe grow a little bit more. The struggling students will always be that bottom 33% who struggle the most, but again, there'll be different levels in each class. And if you tier your instruction in order to benefit all of those, you can really help everyone grow by being leaders and followers when they need. Number 5, the low achieving students want to succeed just as badly as the high achieving students. Don't let them flounder. Sometimes the low achieving students are really embarrassed by having to ask so many questions, so eventually they just stop. Just because they stop asking questions does not mean that they don't have any. They just stopped asking. So don't let them flounder basically means don't assume they know, and don't, even if you know they don't know, then call them on it when you have a moment. If you're going around checking work, something like that, really go up to them, check for their understanding. again, maybe they just are embarrassed that they've asked so many questions. They don't like the fact that their peers, think that they're not understanding. So don't let the low achieving students flounder. Number 6, differentiation does not mean easier work for those that struggle. They need to be pushed just as hard, if not harder, than their peers. The struggling students are going to struggle. And if you just make everything easier for them, that's not going to help them in the end, because if they go on to college or jobs or something, they're not going to get easier work at their job. They're going to be pushed, and they're going to have to push themselves just as hard, if not harder, than everyone else. So they should be treated as such in the classroom. Number 7, differentiation does not mean less work for those that struggle. They need as much, if not more, than their peers. Okay, the number 6 I just said doesn't mean easier work. This one is it doesn't mean less work. A lot of teachers like to say, okay, here's your modification, do problems 1 through 10 instead of 1 through 20. Okay, that doesn't help them. It's still the same concepts that they're trying. If they understood 1 through 10, they could do 1 through 20. So there's really no reason to just lessen the work or make it easier. It needs to be different work that's key, honing in on the key concepts for the struggling students. And finally, number 8, differentiation is a tool to help students succeed. It's not a gimmick. It's not a buzzword. It's not going to, and it should not go away. There have been a lot of buzzwords in education where it's just, this year we're going to do this. Okay, differentiation is not that. Differentiation needs to occur in every classroom, and it needs to happen successfully. If every teacher differentiated their instructions properly, a lot of students would improve a lot. The high-achieving students would get challenged more and therefore grow even more. The struggling students would be also challenged more in the key concepts and therefore grow more, maybe even become up to that benchmark level that we want. So that is my final video presentation for you. Thank you very much for a very good semester. I learned a lot. Hopefully I showed that in this video, and I hope to keep in touch. Thanks.